get into that corruption, that garbage that's in us. St. Isaac of Syria, one great saint whom I read every day, he said, if you're going to go the way of the cross, you must be ready to stand the stench, the garbage that's going to come up inside you and around you when you start seeing things the way they really are and feeling them. Not only knowing them with your brain, but feeling them. And that's why a lot of people flee this kind of activity. It's just too painful. It's just too sad. It may be that there's like generations of grief in there that's going to have to come out and be wept over. It's going to be like lancing a boil that's got to come out. And you'd rather live with the pain of the boil than lance it, especially if you don't know what's going to come out and you're scared to death in your subconscious what you're going to discover. But unless you go in there, you're not going to discover it. And unless you let Christ in there, you're not going to discover it. And so many people need help to let love in, to let healing power in. And they need help even to be able to admit that they're sick. How many people say, nothing wrong with me? Alcoholics, for example. You know, I've known alcoholics. I show them their wife's bruises. That's not me. What are you saying that for? What the heck is this? I'm in church every Sunday, Father. You know that. I say, yeah, it's true. What good did it do you? You may even have used that to cover over your sickness. And by the way, many people use religion to cover over their sickness. Exactly not to come to terms with what's really going on. They think they go to church, they'll say some few prayers, and then they don't have to face it. Well, you got to face it. And by the way, that's why one of the saints, Theophan the Recluse, said, that's why many people who get very religious become worse instead of better. They're more nuts, more crazy, more evil than they were even before they came and got involved in church. Why? Because they're going through all the motions, they're hearing all the words, they're going to Holy Communion, but they're not allowing love and light into the deepest part of their being to be healed. And so what's happening is that light and that love is actually, like St. Gregory Theologian there, he said, that light can come in and cause greater harm if a person is not using the light to be healed. It'll exacerbate the wound. It'll make you more crazy. And by the way, ultimately, we are either sane in the kingdom of God or crazy in hell. And in the meantime, we can play back and forth with it. But if you're going to come to the church, unless you surrender to the fire of the consuming love of God that's shown in the cross, and if you really take the body broken and blood spilled and don't let your own body get broken open and spilled for that love to exist, you're just going to make yourself crazy. And God forgive me, but I think that's going on in our church a lot nowadays. When you hear the evils that go on in our churches, how people hate each other, how the church isn't anything near to be what it's supposed to be, what's the answer? The only answer is because we don't want the cross. We don't want God. We don't want the love of God. But we keep all the other things and become more and more crazy as days go by. More and more evil. More and more, wild. Or more and more kind of, how can you say, to use classic expression, deluded. Deluded. It's not nice at all. And the minute someone says, hey, it ain't nice, they say, oh, negative person. Wants to be Jeremiah the prophet or something, But it's madness. It's madness. Just look at reality. Now, because this is the first point, we have to want, with the help of others, with faith in God, to admit the realities of our life. There is no taking up the cross which is not in the first step an admission of the realities of our life. We have to want to say, this is how things are. And overcome the denials and the delusions and the repressions and the suppressions of facts of our life that we are not willing to admit, to see, and to do something about. This means then that we have to allow ourselves to feel these things, to be in touch with them. There's a jargon out today, it's being in touch with your feelings. There's many of us who have allowed ourselves to admit certain things with our brain, but have not allowed ourselves to feel them on the level of our gut. And that's why we're torn apart and cannot behave properly. And that's why we mess up the lives of our children and everybody around us. Because we haven't come to terms on the emotional level with our life. And we don't only have brains, we have feelings. We don't only have thoughts, we have emotions. And we are made up of a total existence. And so we have to not only become intellectually in terms with our life, that my father was an alcoholic and beat up my mother every Easter. But I have to come to terms with that on the emotional level as well, and mourn it out and forgive it. And I can't forgive it until I first admit it. But if I'm not willing to admit it, I can't forgive it. And if I really admit it, I've got to admit it with my emotional level as well as my intellectual level. And I can't keep pacifying it or cosmetizing it by coming to church and lighting candles. To quote Karl Marx, like opium from the people, keep me in my delusion and don't allow me to get into reality. So the cross is reality itself. So we must get into the reality of our life, and we need other people's help for that. We certainly need some kind of pastoral care, some friends to help us. Family would be the best, but the family is the biggest place for delusion going. Some people would say, even your family won't tell you. But if your family doesn't tell you, who will? Thank God for families. That's why when families are dysfunctional and delusional, there's almost no hope, because you've got a system of delusion. But there should be friends or family or somebody who would help us to see reality. We may need counseling. We may need somebody with professional skills that can help us to get through our repressions and our blocks and our denials to get into reality. Some of us may need certain groups like AA or OA or ACOA or 12-step programs or something that will help us to see what's going on in our life. And if I might make just here a personal comment, I don't know if it's working, but I use all four. I've come to see that you need all the help you can get to see things clearly in order, and this would be the next point, to do something about it. To do something about it. Not just to endure it, not just to suffer it through, but to crush it, you see, to overcome it. Now, in order for that to happen, to take responsibility for the reality of our life, that is an essential element in taking up our cross. To take up our cross means to admit the realities of our life and take responsibility for them. Now, that means, and this is very Christian, very Jesus-y, that means taking responsibility also for those horrible things in our life that are not solely or merely our own fault. In other words, take responsibility for the other, and take responsibility for what has been done to us by the other, and to take responsibility how we have reacted, very often not very Christianly, to the evils that the other has done to us. So this responsibility is very important. We have to come to the point where we don't live in function of other people's opinions, either flattery or cursing or praise or blame. You stop blaming others, even if they have sinned against you magnificently. You stop blaming them and you say, Father, forgive them. They know not what they did. Like my mother used to say, Father, forgive them, they don't know no better. I tried to convince her, Ma, that ain't the way he said it, but it was okay. But we must forgive. We cannot live in function of other people's evil. And by the way, some of us take great delight in that. We build our life in what they call the victim syndrome. And so there is a sense in which we accept our own life for what it was and take responsibility for it all. And that's where the free will comes in. We cannot choose what we have. We cannot choose our crosses. But we can choose to take them up, or we can choose to deny them. We can choose to take them up and expiate the evil, or we can choose to let it go on. And that's the only place where the choice is. And most of us are born incredibly passionate in one way or the other. Food, sex, all this kind of stuff, homosexual orientation and so on. All that comes from fallenness. It's not in our choice whether to have it or not, but it is within our choice what we're going to do about it. And that is especially important, it seems to me, in the inheritance in our families. My daughter Catherine used to wear a badge that said, "It's my father's fault." And I told her, I said to her, Katie, yes, I admit that. But it's your fault what you do about it. And if you're smart enough to put that badge on, then it's no longer an excuse. It's no longer an excuse. You can expiate even my sins if you want to. You can heal me by healing yourself if you want to, or at least contribute to my healing. In other words, there is a moment of responsibility where you don't blame, you overcome the victim syndrome, and then also taking responsibility for oneself means that we do not make our life depend on anything that anyone else does or says. In other words, we don't say, when my mother finally changes, I'll be okay. When my kid finally does this, then everything will be all right. That's from the devil. That is from the devil. Until we finally get a good priest, it's from the devil. You get the priest you deserve, you see, and so on. So, that's an old Russian saying, by the way. But God's hands are in it all. But to take up one's own cross means to take responsibility for one's own life, one's own behavior. And here, of course, this tendency to pass the buck, even like Adam, the woman you gave me, and so on. It doesn't work. See, it doesn't hold water. God doesn't care about that. He says, yes, in fact, I did give you that woman. Why did you listen to her? St. Augustine said Ambrose was much more guilty than Eve. Eve listened to the devil, which was a superior angel. Adam listened to a woman. But taking responsibility for our life and not in function of other people